Hello Payao, good morning, and for today's video, we're going to talk about more on the crop science under the principle of crop science, which is psychological process affecting the crop production. Specifically, we're going to talk about more on translocation. So let's begin. So to begin with, what is the translocation? Translocation is a movement of organic substance made by plant which are called assimilates. These are things such as sugars and other chemicals made by plant cells are transported into pulp tissue. Assimilates are transported into sieve elements, which are more closely together with companion to cells to achieve translocation. So the parts of plant that releases the assimilates into the pulp is called a source, and the part of plant that removes the assimilate from the pulp is called a sink. Furthermore, translocation is a movement of materials from leaves to tissues throughout the plants. Plants produce carbohydrates, which is sugars, and other organic and non-organic materials. For this reason, nutrients are translocated from sources, regions of excess carbohydrates, primary mature leaves, to sinks, regions where the carbohydrate is needed. Some important sinks are roots, flowers, fruits, stems, and developing leaves. Leaves are particularly interesting in this regard because they are sinks when they are young and become sources later when they are about half grown. Let's proceed into sieve leaves.
In plant anatomy, sieve tube elements are also called sieve tube members. But what is this sieve tube elements? Sieve tube elements are highly specialized type of elongated cell in the phloem tissue of flowering plants, and the ends of these cells are connected with other sieve tube members, and together they constitute the sieve tube. But what is the main function of this sieve tube? The main function of the sieve tube is the transport of carbohydrates, primarily sucrose, in the plant, for example, from the leaves to the fruits and roots. So unlike the water-conducting xylem vessel elements that are dead when mature, sieve elements are living cells.
Now, let's talk about companion cells. But what is companion cells? Companion cells are living cells that are connected to the sieve tube members of the phloem through plasmodesmata. These plasmodesmata are membrane-lined cytoplasmic nanopores that breeds adjacent plant cells, enabling direct communication with one another. Now, each sieve elements have at least one companion cells alongside it. Companion cells have similar structure of a normal plant cells as they have a cellulose cell wall, a plasma membrane, cytoplasm, a vacuole, and a nucleus. But these companion cells have larger number of mitochondria and ribosomes. Also, the vacuole of the companion cells are relatively small instead of large.
And now let's move on how does the translocation occurs. So it is said that inside a sieve tube is a phloem sac, and this was moved by mass flow. So a pressure difference are needed to be created in order to achieve mass flow in the phloem, meaning that the plant has to use its own energy. And this pressure difference is the outcome of active loading of sucrose into the sieve elements at the place from which the sucrose is to be transported, normally a photosynthesizing leaf. These movements of sucrose decreases the water potential in the sap inside the sieve tube, which causes water to move into the sieve element down to a water potential gradient by the process which is called osmosis. In the leaf or the source, water moves into the sieve tube and moves out of it into the root or the sink, and a pressure difference is created. So this pressure difference causes the liquid inside the tube to flow from the higher pressure area to the lower one.
Now let's talk about the loading of sucrose into the phloem. Some sugar produced by photosynthesis are converted into sucrose. This sucrose is transported into the other parts of the plant by phloem. And of course, sucrose is a soluble substance, so it dissolves in the water and mesophyll cells and moves out of the cell and across the leaf by either in the apoplast or symplast pathway. The sucrose is then transferred into the companion cells by active transport and then into the sieve tube through plasmodesmata.
Now talking about the pressure flow mechanism, let us first know what is pressure flow. The mechanism by which sugars are transported through the phloem from sources to sink is what we call pressure flow. So at the sources, usually the leaves, sugar molecules are moved into the sieve elements or phloem cells through active transport. Then, water follows the sugar molecules into the sieve elements through osmosis, since water passively diffuses into regions of higher solute concentration. And this water creates turgor pressure in the sieve elements, which forces the sugars and fluids down the phloem tubes towards the sink. And at the sinks, the sugars are actively removed from the phloem and water follows osmotically, so that conditions of high water potential and low turgor pressure are created, driving the pressure flow process.
And at the other end of the transport stream in the sinks, sugar is constantly living in the phloem and being used by the surrounding cells. So some is consumed as an energy source, some is stored as a sugar or starch, and some is used to make new cells if the sink tissue is growing. So since the sugar leaves the phloem in the sink, water exits too, again by the process called osmosis, and the pressure goes down. So therefore, there is a difference in the pressure between source and sink phloem. So this causes the solution to flow just as water flows along the pressure gradient in a garden hose. So this pressure is known as a pressure flow mechanism.
Sugar loading. As a result of photosynthesis, the sugars such as sucrose produced in mesophyll cells moves to the sieve tubes of smallest veins of the leaf, either directly or through only 2 to 3 cells depending upon the leaf anatomy. Consequently, the concentration of sugars increases in sieve tubes in comparison to the surrounding mesophyll cells. While phloem unloading, it occurs in the consumption end or sinks organ sucrose, and unloading also occurs through symplast via plasmodesmata or through apoplast at some point and route to sink cells. Sugars move from sieve tubes to receiver cells in the sink involving the 3 steps, which is the sieve element unloading, the short distance transport, and the storage and metabolism.